So, welcome viewers to this next lecture on the very important topic regarding Indian knowledge traditions. Sources of Indian knowledge traditions. This discussion is divided into two parts. First, we will try to discuss those sources which belong to basically Indian sources, and particularly the literary sources that are available in the form of written evidences. So the agenda set for discussion of this particular topic is comprehending the idea of Indian sources, then understanding Vedic literature, because this is one of the fundamental sources of Indian knowledge traditions. Then identifying the continuity of literary heritage, that Indian knowledge traditions is not just confined, as we have discussed in the previous lecture, to a particular era or particular corpus of knowledge traditions. Rather, in a continuity, it included the efforts and contributions of some other sources too. So we will see about it. Literary heritage. Then finding out cross-cultural impact. Many people from different communities, different cross-cultural sections, different ethnic and anthropological areas, they also contributed. So we will see about it. Then exploring continuity, whether this Indian knowledge traditions is still continued, then we will see in the forthcoming discussions. The vision of Indian knowledge traditions begins with these beautiful lines from the Vedas, Ano Bhadra Kratvo Yantu Vishvata, that comes from the Rig Veda. It means, let noble thoughts come to me from all directions. So this is the vision of Indian knowledge traditions, that it is inclusive, it is pluralistic, and it is welcoming. Wherever there is something good for the knowledge, that is the part of Indian knowledge traditions, without any distinction, without any discrimination. So that is the welcoming note. That is the very beginning of Indian knowledge traditions. And again, you see literary sources, the timeline is there. Shruti period, in the last lecture we discussed particularly the Vedic period. That starts with 1500 BC up to the 1000 BC, Rig Vedic period, later Vedic, and the beyond Vedic period. And then first Renaissance begins in 6th century. Why we call it Renaissance? Because the people in that areas and the different philosophical movements, they try to challenge the Vedic ideas in certain philosophical ways. Jainas and Buddhist schools, Charvakas, and during the period of Mauryas and Guptas. So that's why urbanization, it is also called the second urbanization, and sometimes international trades were expanding. People were thinking in different ways. The means of worshipping were also changing, and the relations of India were starting with the foreign elements, like during the Mauryan period. You see that India came in the contact of Roman Empire, and the Roman culture entered in India, Greek culture entered in India. So such factors were also responsible. So we will also see in one of the lectures there. And then Smriti period, around 200 BC to 600 AD. This is the largest period, where starting from the Manu Smriti to the Deval Smriti. It is called the Smriti because this is based on the traditions and most of the time the books which are compiled in this period are solely for the social issues. They just address the social issues based on the culture and traditions. Then second Renaissance begins as a composite culture in 8th century Christian era or AD. Vedanta schools, Bhakti literature, Indo-Islamic literature, translation works of the Sufi literature. And then again the third Renaissance begins with the 18th century. Modern Indian literature, Swami Vivekananda, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, and others. So many other people were there. Literary societies were formed, freedom struggle, during colonial period, many people also contributed. So literary sources, they will provide you the vast basis or the underpinnings of the Indian knowledge traditions, not only confined to only the ancient sources. Just if we wish to have a glimpse of the Vedic literature, we see that the entire corpus of the Vedic literature is divided into four. The Samhita, books of mantras that include the four basic Vedas, Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sam Veda, and Atharva Veda. We will discuss in detail in the literature part. Then second category is the Brahmana Granthas. They are the books of rituals, books of Karma Kanda. And then the Aranyakas, they are the books of forest. Basically, Aranya means in the forest, and these books were composed and these were written by and for the people who were living in the Vanprastha ashram and the Sannyas ashram. So on the basis of their experiences, they just compiled. And they also, this is the starting of philosophy also, because in such type of books, meditation, contemplation was the main source of gyan and knowledge. And they raised certain questions. And the answers or curiosities of the jigyasa, what we have just discussed in the previous lecture, out of the jigyasa, athato dharma jigyasa, athato brahma jigyasa, athato tattva jigyasa, out of those curiosities, whatever was achieved, that were compiled in the form of knowledge or the traditions, in the form of Upanishads. So Aranyakas were the beginning of philosophy, and Upanishads are the philosophical discourses. Upanishads also give us a very well organized and well furnished pedagogy, teacher-students relations, and the very fundamental principles for the education system. So we will all discuss in detail. This category of literature is considered Shruti, what is heard, the product of divine revelation. And we have already discussed it. The whole of the literature seems to have been preserved orally, although there may have been early manuscripts to assist memory. And when we talk about the sources of Indian dialogics, they all come from the Upanishads. In the modern time, we just talk about that the dialogues are one of the very popular methods in educational system. Like dialogues come from the pedagogy of oppressed by John Dewey or by Mikhail Bakhtin, the Russian literature. So if you just see, apart from those contributions from the Western and European and Brazilian educationists and scholars, philosophers, Upanishads were the early sources of the dialogism, of the dialogues. These are the stories on your screen you see, and the sources of these dialogues are Kathopanishad, Chandogpanishad, Brihadaranyaka or the Ketopanishads. On the left hand side, you see the certain stories are there: Nachiketa and Seeker, Rekava and Car Driver, Gargi and Yagvalkar. So by way of storytelling methods, by way of dialogics method, question answers methods, they all gave origin to the well-organized dialogics as a pedagogy, dialogues as a pedagogy in teachers training, basically in ancient India. And dialogues and storytelling are also there in cross-cultural traditions apart from the Upanishads, like Yaksh and Yudhishthir. This is one of the episodes in Mahabharata. Draupadi in Mahasabha, she also raises certain kinds of questions, and the dialogue occurs in the court of the king. The Sri Krishna and Arjuna dialogues that appears in Srimad Bhagavad Gita. And Sita and Ramana also, the beautiful dialogues are there. Yama and Savitri, Shankaracharya and Bharati Devi, Panchtantra, Hitopdesh, Jatakas, they are the books of stories, storytellings, tales, fables. Then Sufi tales, Gulistan by Sheikh Sadi, Bustan by Sheikh Sadi, these are the Persian literature. Masnavi-e-Manavi by Jalaluddin Rumi, Diwan-e Hafiz by Hafiz Shirazi, and Rubaiyat Umar Khayyam. These are the Persian sources of dialogues and storytellings and the spiritual literature, as well as they are very popular in India because they were many of these literatures were composed in the Iran, but during the 11th and 20th century, India came in the contact of Iranian culture, and Persian as a language became the court language of India. So that also influenced the Indian knowledge traditions. So that's why they are equally the part of Indian knowledge traditions. Then Sufi literature, Alif Laila, Persian tales, the literature written in the Arabic also became the part of Indian knowledge traditions, because Macaulay also uses the term that all the literature of India and Arabia is equal to the statement what he uses equal to the shelf. It was the books kept in the shelf of one European library. So he takes into integration in a holistic way the whole literature of India and Arabia. So during 12th and 13th century up to the 17th and 18th century, the culture of India and Arab India and Iran, they were so intermingled that they gave a very rich treasure of knowledge traditions to India. So we will see all these things in forthcoming lectures. Then Vedangas, they are very important source of knowledge traditions. Vedangas are the books and the supportive books. They were composed in order to understand the Vedic literature. Shiksha, the science of phonetics. Kalpa, rituals written in the forms of formulas. Sutras, 4 types of sutras were there: Shraut, Grihi, Dharma or Shulva. Then Vyakaran, the grammar. Nirukta or the etymology. Chand or the meters or the poetic diction. Jyotish or the astronomy. And Smritis or the Dharma Shastras, you see, most ancient is the Manu Smriti, Yagvalk Smriti, Vishnu, Narad commentaries, Brihaspati, Katyayan, Parashar, Gautam, Vashishta, or the Deval is the last Smriti. The subject matter is important of these Smriti or Dharma Shastras. Contemporary political system, social economic traditions, ethics and morality, conduct, vidhi, vidhan, religious obligations, social system. These are the subject matters of Smritis. Then Buddhist and Jain sources like Tripitakas, Vinay Pitak, Sutta Pitak, and the Abhidham Pitak. Abhidham Pitak consists of the philosophical theories, Sutta Pitak, theories and doctrines of Bodh Dharma, and then Vinay Pitak, ethics, code of conduct, rules for daily life related issues are there. Then some other supplementary literature by the Buddhist monks and Buddhist scholars like Milind Pant, Deepvansh and Mahavansh, they were composed in Sri Lanka when Buddhism reached there. Then Ashvaghosha, one of the very important writers during Harshvardhana time, Buddhacharit, Saundaryanand, Sariputra Prakaran, and Agam literature, like Jain literature is known as the Agam literature. And the language of Buddhist literature and Jain literature were Buddhist were written in the Pali, and Jain literature were written in the Prakrit. So that's why these literature have a separate importance for Indian knowledge traditions, because the language is also different and language brings with itself a particular culture. So the entire Vedic literature was composed in Sanskrit language, but this Buddhist and Jain literature was composed in Pali and Prakrit, and these are the languages which were the language of the common people. So that's why you find the difference. The epics, Mahabharata and Ramayana. Kalidas, one of the 9 jewels of the court of Chandragupta Vikramaditya during Guptan period. Kalidas is known as one of the greatest dramatists of India, of ancient India, and he composed these books in Sanskrit. So Sanskrit literature is further categorized into 2 parts. One is the religious literature or philosophical literature, or the scriptures were there like Vedas, Upanishads. And in Sanskrit also, the popular literature were also composed like these Kalidas, and Ramayana is also one of the categories of popular literature, or epics in the category of epics. Ramayana, Valmiki Ramayana was written in Sanskrit, but its version, the modern version in 16th century, was written by Goswami Tulsidas. The language of Goswami Tulsidas, Ramcharitmanas, is Awadhi. This is the local dialect of Hindi. And Mahabharat, originally it is written in Sanskrit, and its part is Srimad Bhagavad Gita, equally it is in Sanskrit. And Kalidas also composed all such books, Ritu Samhar, Abhigyan Shakuntalam, Raghuvansham, Meghdutam, so on. Malvika Agnimitram, Vikramovarshye, they are all in the Sanskrit. And then again, Natya Shastra of Bharat Muni, this is one of the beautiful books that is the basis of the theatrical art, and the rasa theory is there. Then Vishakha Datta, Mudra Rakshas, Devi Chandraguptam. Shudrak was very important. Apart from Kalidas, another dramatist was Shudrak. He composed Mrachakatikam. Then Harshvardhan, he was a king as well as a writer also. He was a scholar also. He composed the 3 Natakas, Ratnavali, Nagananda, and Priyadarshika. Then Bhavabhuti wrote Uttar Ramcharit, and then Rajshekhar, Bal Ramayan, Bal Bharat, Panchtantra, Hitopdesha. These were also the books. These are the sources of Indian knowledge traditions. Then Arthashastra, Kautilya's Arthashastra is one of the masterpieces in Indian knowledge traditions. Then Vatsyayanan's, Maharishi Vatsyayan's Kama Sutra, that talks about the 64 arts, the source of skill education. So few examples are on your screen, but we will discuss it in detail on the literature part. Then two prominent treatises, the sources of Indian knowledge traditions are the Megasthenes Indica and another is Kautilya's Arthashastra. What they say, Megasthenes Indica is a brief account of content, says that geography and natural history, society and social structure, political administration, military system, philosophy and religion, customs and practices. Megasthenes was the Greek ambassador to India who came to the court of Chandragupta Maurya during the time of Kautilya. At the same time, the Megasthenes describes these things in his book that becomes the very prominent source of Indian knowledge traditions and ancient Indian political administration. Kautilya's Arthashastra is also equally important book that gives a great and detailed account of ancient Indian public administration. It talks about Saptanga theory of state, kingship and administration, law and justice, economy and agriculture, foreign policy, war and defense, public welfare, and so on. Then certain other 16 schools of darshana in ancient India were developed as Charvak Darshan, Baudh Darshan, Jain Darshan, Ramanujam Darshan, and so on. So, what is the source of these 16 darshanas are none but the Sarva Darshan Sangrah, written by the Madhvacharya. He was a 16th century saint who composed it in the South India. So these are the sources when we talk about the 6 schools of Indian philosophy and heterodox and orthodox schools or the Charvakas. So they all come from these this particular book which was composed in 16th century, and here we find the Dvaitvad, Advaitvad, all those darshanas which developed during 7th to 8th century. Then we talk about the continuity and consensus. The continuity of intellectualism, spiritualism and knowledge system that reaches to the medieval period, and it also equally reached to passing through the different ups and downs by interacting with the cross-cultural traditions, different languages. They entered into Indian traditions like Greek and Roman and Arab and also Persian literature. Then Indian knowledge traditions also flourished by way of interaction with so many other cross-cultural elements. So intellectual journey takes a turning point in 6th century Renaissance, that is called 6th century Renaissance, with the beginning of Jaina and Buddhist philosophy, because they were entirely away from the Vedic sources or Vedic roots. They established their own attitude towards the world and phenomena and its problems. Then legacy of dialogics in Buddhism also continued. 4 Buddhist councils, divisions of Buddhism, Jatakas, Milinpan. So Milinpan is a book of dialogue form. That dialogue is entirely different from that of the Upanishads. So that legacy continued. And then the continuity of those Indian knowledge traditions and those popular spiritual debates and the quest for knowledge continued in the Sufi and Bhakti traditions. Here you see the Nanakas and the Sufi, Nanak, Kabir, Raidas and those traditions continued in medieval India, and also equally the Bhakti traditions also developed starting from the Alwar and Nayanar in South India, that reached to the northern India and reached to the Odisha up to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and in Assam you see Shankar Mahadev, Namdev in Maharashtra and so on, Sant Gyaneshwar in Maharashtra. So we will discuss all such elements and aspects in a separate lecture. Then Bhakti traditions, some prominent saints are Shankaracharya, Nayanar and Alwar saints in South India. Then you see Ramanand, Basavana, Lalan Fakir and Bauls of Bengal, then Guru Nanak, Mirabai, Swami Haridas, he was the Guru of Tansen, Tulsidas, Sant Gyaneshwar and Shankar Dev and Sant of Kashmir like Nuruddin Rishi and Lal Dei, etc. Then comes the Muslim intellectual efforts to understand Hindu religious philosophy. Warm relations, S.A. Rizvi, Sayyid Athar Abbas Rizvi in his very popular book writes about the Muslim interaction and what were the efforts, what Muslim scholars made for the preservation and transmission of this great culture of India and how they perceived this great culture. That is defined by S.A. Rizvi in his book. Warm relations started developing between Sufis and yogis, And yogic ideas not only got mixed into Sufi ideology, but yogic practices also got included in the daily routine of Sufis. One of the Sufi cults like Chishtiya and Naqshbandiya, they observe the yogi practices in their spiritual activities. So in Sufism, yogic influence can be clearly seen on the Kalandariya and the Rifaiya cults of Sufis. So Siddha yogis and Hatha yogis have had a special influence on the Chishti Sufi order in India. So there is a separate discussion on the Bhakti and Sufi traditions in a separate literature, there separate lecture, there we will discuss all about. Then one of the prominent figures is Al-Baruni, and his contribution is the marvelous about Indian knowledge traditions. His work is Tehqeeq-e-Hind. This is the pioneer work, the first comprehensive dissertation on Indian culture, religion and philosophy. He also translated Bhagavad Puran in Arabic language. In Tehqeeq-e-Hind, what Al-Baruni says, it's apart from many statements, this is a statement I have quoted, the difference in religious beliefs of educated people and illiterate people is found in every country. Educated people struggle even to conceive of abstract ideas, while the illiterate submit themselves to ready-made rules and norms. So this is one of the philosophical observation that was done by the Al-Baruni on his scholarly study of Indian traditions. Al-Baruni's name can be taken first among the founders of Indology because his entire work is based on the Indian culture and knowledge traditions. Then another name is very prominent, Amir Khusro. And Akbar also, he facilitated various translation works of original Sanskrit manuscripts. Amir Khusro's vivid portrayal of Indian culture and society in his poetry. He is called the Tutiye-Hind, and he used the local dialects, and he also introduced the Zaban-e-Hindavi. Actually, that term was first used by Sharfuddin Yazdi in his book Zafarnama. But Amir Khusro widely used the local language of the people, and he called himself as the Tutiye-Hind. Tutiye-Hind means the parrot of India, because he was well versed in the local dialects and the language of the people, even if he was a scholar of Persian. But he could speak the Indian languages, particularly the Hindi, and he composed his Paheli and he composed his the statements in the local dialects also. I think you have heard Chhap Tilak Sab Chhini Muh Se Naina Mila Ke, Bahut Kathin Hai Dagar Panghat Ki. So these are the poetry of this. Then composed by Amir Khusro. Then Dara Shikoh's heroic effort for the unity of the two religions cost his life. Dara Shikoh is another prominent figure. We will discuss in the next slide about it. He translated the 52 Upanishads. During Akbar's reign, Akbar's time, certain Sanskrit entities and Sanskrit treatises were translated. And this was the immense contribution, because people whose language was not Sanskrit, they came to know about this great or the vast treasure of knowledge available in Sanskrit language. Like Razmnama is the translation of Mahabharata, Kissa Nalaudaman, the Nal Damayanti Katha, Kalila va Dimna, that is the translation of Panchtantra. Persian translation of the Ramayana was done during the reign of Akbar. Then Raj Tarangidi, it is the book based on the history of Kashmir up to 12th century, that was translated by in Persian. It was written by Kalhan in Kashmir. Then Leelavati, it is one of the ancient Sanskrit books on the topic of mathematics, that was translated in Persian during that period. Then Upanishads by Dara Shikoh, he translated Sirre Akbar, the Persian translation of 52 Upanishads. And another book is the Majmul Bahrain. Regarding the Upanishads translation, you see that it reached to Awadh in 1754, the Persian translation, and Nawab Shuja-ud-Dawla. During the time of Nawab Shuja-ud-Dawla, there was a French resident who purchased a copy and sent it to the Persian scholar Anticle Duprin. Anticle Duprin, the original language of Anticle Duprin was, the mother tongue was the Latin, who translated the Persian text written by Dara Shikoh into the Latin language in 1801. And then later, from the Latin, the Upanishads were translated by Schopenhauer into the English. And he was very much fond of the Upanishads when he came in contact of its content. And he used to say, Upanishads are the solace of my life and death. So by way of the efforts of Dara Shikoh, who translated the Upanishads in Persian, the Upanishads reached to Europe and became popular in the languages of Europe, like Latin and English and so on. Then Majmul Bahrain is another very important book. The very title of this book has been taken from one of the verses of the Quran, Maraj al-Bahraini yaltaqiyan. Here in the Quran, the two oceans are described. The water of one ocean is warm and water of one ocean is cold. So in that way, so Dara Shikoh takes the stuff of his title of this book from that verse of the Quran. He says it's the meeting of the two oceans. One ocean is the spirituality of the Upanishads and another ocean is the spirituality of the Islam, that is the Sufism. India is a place where these two oceans meet, the spiritual mingling of these two great mysteries. That's why it is called the Majmul Bahrain, the mingling of the two great oceans. So this is the first book of the comparative religious studies. So Dara Shikoh may also be called as the father of the comparative or the interfaith studies or the Indology, also like Al-Biruni. Then few works of Sufi scholars during 13th and 16th century that also add to the Indian knowledge traditions. Miratul Hikayat by Abdul Rahman Chishti. This is the Sufi interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita. Then Sankhya Darshan and Patanjali Yoga Sutra were translated by Al-Biruni in Arabic translation. Then Alakbani. This is one of the very important books translated by Hamiduddin Nagauri, Hindi Sufi poet. It is not a translation, rather he writes the idea of Shiva and his worship and the spiritual or the mystical aspects of the Lord Shiva in the form of Alakbandi, and he used to say himself, the Alak, Niranjan was the word what he used to recite. And he was a great follower of Lord Shiva as a yogi. Then Jyot Niranjan by Rizqullah Mushtaqi, he was a Sufi scholar. And then Hawzul Hayat. This is one of the ancient books which is not available now in the original manuscripts, but it is translated in Arabic by the title Hawzul Hayat, and this is the translation of the Amrit Kund. Amrit Kund is not available now in the original form, but the Arabic and Persian translations are available. Sheikh Abdul Quddus Gangohi translated it. And Bahrul Hayat is the Persian translation of the same book, Amrit Kund, by Sheikh Muhammad Ghaus of Gwalior. So these are the few contributions by the Sufi scholars who also contributed to the treasure of Indian knowledge traditions. Then Sangam literature, sources of Indian knowledge traditions in South India, in Tamil, Telugu and other languages also. And you see here are certain suggested books for your convenience. So I am just winding up this lecture by these beautiful lines of Rabindranath Tagore. It is very simple to be happy, but it is very difficult to be simple. Thank you very much. See you in the next lecture. God bless.